1945 is probably the darkest.
Adolf Hitler is dead.
Because it's entirely built on the authority and charisma of one figure.
The Nazis were very much concerned to purify and cleanse German society.
For decades, the world wondered, did Hitler's right-hand man really die in Berlin? Whispers placed him in South America, masterminding a secret Nazi network. The truth was buried under a mountain of myth and conspiracy. Now, for the first time, the full story of the officer who held the keys to the Führerbunker can be told. This is the explosive account of the officer in the inner circle, the secrets he took with him, and the evidence that finally reveals what happened in the bunker's final hours. Our story doesn't begin in a grand office, but in the muddy fields of post-war Germany. Our man, Martin Bormann, was born in 1900, and his early life was, to be blunt, underwhelming. He was a poor student. His time in the army at the end of World War I was brief, and he saw no action. He then found himself working as a manager on a large farm in Mecklenburg. But it was here, in the countryside, that he found his calling. He joined a paramilitary group called the Freikorps, a hotbed for radical nationalists and angry young men. This association led him to his first serious crime. In 1923, Bormann was involved in the murder of a man named Walter Kardau, whom his group believed was an informant. For his part, as an accomplice, Bormann was sentenced to a year in prison. One of his fellow perpetrators was Rudolf Höss, a name that would later become infamous as the commandant of the Auschwitz concentration camp. This was the kind of company Bormann kept. When he was released in 1925, the political landscape was shifting. Bormann heard a speech by Adolf Hitler and was instantly deeply impressed. He officially joined the Nazi Party in 1927, and this is where he truly began to find his feet. You see, Bormann was no fiery speaker or charismatic leader. He was something else entirely, a master bureaucrat. His big break came when he was put in charge of the Nazi Party's relief fund, a kind of insurance scheme for members injured in street fights. It was a boring, administrative job, and that was its genius. Bormann controlled the money. He decided who got help and who didn't. In the chaotic early days of the Nazi movement, this made many powerful people personally indebted to him. He was building a network of obligations, one discrete payment at a time. His personal life also became a strategic asset. In 1929, he married Gerda Busch, a devoted Nazi. The wedding witnesses were none other than Rudolf Hess and Adolf Hitler himself. Bormann was now part of the family. His rise was steady and deliberate. In 1933, he became Chief of Staff to Deputy Führer Rudolf Hess. Hess hated paperwork and administration. Bormann lived for it. He slowly took over the day-to-day running of the party machinery, becoming the man behind the man. He was always there, in the background, managing the flow of paper, the appointments, the money. And then, in May 1941, a gift fell from the sky. Rudolf Hess made his bizarre solo flight to Scotland in a misguided attempt to make peace with the British. Hitler was furious and declared Hess a traitor. Someone had to take over his duties. Who was the one man who knew how everything worked? Who had been doing the job for years already? Martin Bormann. He was instantly appointed head of the party chancellery. Now, he wasn't just managing the bureaucracy, he was the bureaucracy. He had final approval over civil service appointments and could review all legislation. But his most powerful new role was unofficial. He became Hitler's personal secretary, the gatekeeper to the Führer himself. He controlled who saw Hitler, what information reached his desk, and what was kept away. If you wanted something from the most powerful man in Germany, you had to go through Martin Bormann first. Ministers, generals, party leaders, all found their access blocked by this unassuming, stocky man with a fondness for administration. The shadowy farmhand from Mecklenburg had, through a mix of cunning, cruelty, and a genius for paperwork, positioned himself at the very heart of power. He was the brown eminence, and from his desk, he would soon help steer the fate of a nation. If the Nazi state was a machine, then by 1943, Martin Bormann was the man at the control panel. But to truly understand his power, we have to descend with him, deep underground, into the cramped, concrete world of the Führerbunker in 1945. The air down there was thick. It was a mix of damp concrete, sweat, cheap cigars, and pure fear. This wasn't the grand halls of power anymore. This was a tomb, and everyone in it knew it. The walls shook from the constant Russian shelling overhead, a grim reminder that the world above was crumbling into rubble. In this claustrophobic nightmare, titles and medals meant nothing. What mattered was access, and Bormann controlled the door. His official titles were head of the party chancellery and the Führer's secretary. It sounds boring, like a glorified note-taker, but in reality, he was the gatekeeper. No piece of paper reached Hitler's desk without Bormann seeing it first. No general, no minister could plead their case without Bormann's approval. He was the filter. If he didn't like you or your message, you simply ceased to exist in Hitler's world. He would calm the Führer's rages, steer his decisions with a well-placed memo, and quietly ensure his own policies became Hitler's orders. And what were those policies? This is where we move from bureaucratic tricks to outright evil. Because Bormann wasn't just managing an office, he was actively shaping the regime's worst crimes. From his desk flowed directives that deepened the Holocaust. He was a fanatic in his hatred of Judaism and Christianity, pushing for harsh measures against churches and anyone deemed an enemy of the state. He was deeply involved in the Nazi slave labor program, a monstrous system that worked millions to death for the war effort. This wasn't a side project. This was central to the Nazi war machine, and Bormann was one of its chief architects. But perhaps one of the most chilling examples of his cold-blooded nature was his response to the Allied bombing campaigns. As German cities burned, public anger grew. Sometimes, Allied airmen who parachuted out of their damaged planes were captured by civilians or local police. What should be done with these prisoners of war? In the spring of 1944, Bormann issued an order. He instructed that police and Nazi officials should not intervene if crowds of German citizens lynched these captured airmen. Let that sink in. The second most powerful man in Germany was officially sanctioning mob murder. He was turning captured soldiers who should have been protected under international law into targets for a vengeful public. It was a deliberate, calculated decision to encourage barbarity. Back in the bunker, as the end drew near, his power became absolute. While generals argued about lost battles, Bormann controlled the only thing that mattered: Hitler's ear. He was the constant shadow, whispering, manipulating, ensuring his own survival until the very last second. He sent out frantic telegrams to officials, still trying to control a country that was already lost. He knew every secret, every deluded last hope. He was no longer just the secretary, he was the devil's right hand, signing orders in a dying empire, all from a stuffy underground room. And when the final curtain fell, he was perfectly positioned to make his next move, to vanish. So, this is where the history books try to close the chapter, the end of the story. But for Martin Bormann, it's where the real mystery begins. Let's set the scene. It's April 30th, 1945. In the deep, dark bunker, Adolf Hitler commits suicide. The news shatters the remaining inhabitants. For Martin Bormann, it's a professional and personal catastrophe. The man who was his source of power, his entire reason for being, is gone. Now, it's every man for himself. The official story goes like this. On May 1st, with the Soviet Red Army just streets away, a group of survivors, including Bormann, decides to make a desperate break for it. The plan is to fight their way out of central Berlin. The world outside is a hellscape of fire, rubble, and gunfire. Witnesses later said Bormann was part of this group. One of those witnesses was Arthur Axmann, the head of the Hitler Youth. He claimed that as their group tried to cross a bridge, they were hit by a barrage of tank fire. In the chaos, Axmann said he stumbled upon two bodies lying near a railway bridge. He identified them as Martin Bormann and Hitler's personal doctor, Ludwig Stumpfegger. He claimed he saw no obvious wounds on them and assumed they had swallowed cyanide capsules to avoid capture. He then fled, leaving the bodies there. Based on this testimony, for decades, the official record was that Martin Bormann died that night, a suicide on the banks of the Spree River. A messy end, but an end nonetheless. Case closed. But from the very beginning, this story was full of holes. It was built on a foundation of doubt and shadow. The first and biggest crack appeared at the highest level. Just a few months after the war, at the Potsdam Conference, Soviet leader Joseph Stalin dropped a bombshell. He casually told the American Secretary of State that he believed Hitler had escaped. He suggested the Führer wasn't dead at all, but had fled somewhere, perhaps to Spain or Argentina. This wasn't just gossip. It was a deliberate act that poured fuel on the fire of conspiracy. Then, there's the problem with the bodies. The Soviets, who controlled the area, never officially found Bormann's body where Axmann said it would be. They remained silent. This silence was deafening. If they had the body of such a high-ranking Nazi, why not announce it to the world? Was it because they were embarrassed that they hadn't found him? Or was it because they knew something they weren't telling? And what about Arthur Axmann's story? He was the sole source for Bormann's death, but his account was shaky. He was a desperate man trying to save his own skin in the chaotic final hours of the war. Could his identification, made in the dark amidst total panic, be trusted? Or was it a convenient way to throw everyone off the scent? So, let's lay it out. The official story rests on the word of one man, a story that the conquering army seemingly contradicts by its silence and its leader's own words. Nobody was produced. No physical proof was offered. This is the fertile ground where legends grow. This is the moment we have to ask ourselves, what if the gatekeeper used his final, greatest skill one last time? What if the master of controlling information and access staged the perfect disappearance? What if the story of his death in Berlin was the last and most effective piece of paperwork he ever filed? The man who knew all the regime's darkest secrets simply vanished into the night, and a world hungry for answers was left with only a haunting, tantalizing question. What if he got away? While the world was told Hitler died in 1945, shadowy reports and tips kept intelligence services busy for years after the war. One of the stranger threads ran through CIA files in the 1950s. In 1955, a former SS soldier named Philip Citroen told an American agent he had met a man calling himself Adolf Schrittelmeyer in Tunia, Colombia. Citroen handed over a photograph, himself arm in arm with the man, and swore the stranger looked like an older Hitler. He went further, telling the agent that the man had left for Argentina in January of that year. That single lead was the kind of thing that could not be ignored. A claimed eyewitness, a photo, and a neat, continent-hopping escape route. The CIA logged it, probed local leads where they could, and added it to a pile of similar. The La Falda episode in 1945 shows why those reports got traction. US investigators had chased rumors of a secret hideout at a spa hotel in La Falda, Argentina, a resort whose owners and local circle were widely known to admire the Third Reich and to host German expatriates. Allied agents were told the hotel provided safe, comfortable cover for fugitives and visiting dignitaries, and it was enough to trigger on-the-ground inquiries. Hotels, churches, shipping manifests, and the small, private networks of expatriate Germans suddenly mattered, not just as vacation spots, but as nodes in a map of escape and concealment. If Hitler's fate produced long, stubborn questions, the search for Martin Bormann was even more chaotic and global. Bormann, Hitler's private secretary and a man with access to the Nazi inner circle, vanished amid the collapse of Berlin, and the vacuum around him became fertile ground for rumor. For years after 1945, intelligence services were flooded with sightings. A man in a Tyrolean hat in Bavaria, a supposed Israeli doctor in Switzerland, a writer in Catalonia polishing his memoirs. The most persistent and dramatic claims sent him to South America. Some accounts said he arrived by submarine in Argentina and later slipped into Chile, where he allegedly helped run secret Nazi organizations. Those stories were hard to ignore because the post-war world was messy. Millions moved across borders. Identity papers were fake or missing, and entire networks, sometimes called ODESSA in popular accounts, were rumored to help former Nazis flee Europe. Agents chasing real fugitives had to sort through genuine leads, confident lies, opportunistic fabrications, and plain hoaxes. Then there was Operation James Bond. Written in 1997 by Christopher Crichton, the book claims a secret British plot in 1945 snatched Martin Bormann from Berlin, found his hidden fortune, and moved other Nazi assets into Allied hands. The story drops big names. Ian Fleming is said to have taken part, and a secret M section run by Major Desmond Morton supposedly gave the orders. Creighton casts himself as the field agent who made it happen. But the book has big problems. The author's identity is messy, key sources are vague, and real proof is thin or missing. Historians and some former spies have called many of the claims doubtful or made up. Still, the international manhunt for Hitler and Bormann looked less like a tidy police operation and more like a wartime scavenger hunt. Intelligence officers followed paper trails through shipping logs and hotel registers, interviewed émigrés in cafes, and monitored telegrams. Some leads produced arrests and clarifications. Many others ended as dead ends. Because of the reports of Bormann being seen in Argentina, Spain, and in other places, his wife was watched closely by Allied agents who thought he might try to reach her. One of the loudest claims came from Jakob Glass, Bormann's longtime driver, who said he had seen Bormann in Munich in July 1946. That kind of eyewitness account kept hope alive that Bormann might still be at large. Authorities took no chances. In October and November 1945, public notices telling Bormann about the upcoming Nuremberg trials were put in newspapers and read on the radio. The idea was simple. If he was alive and hiding, he had to be told he faced charges. When the International Military Tribunal opened its hearings on the 20th of November 1945, it did not have proof that Bormann was dead. Under the rules of the court, he could be tried in absentia, that is, tried even if he wasn't present. The court charged Bormann with 3 major crimes: planning and starting aggressive war crimes, and crimes against humanity. The prosecution team was led by Lieutenant Thomas F. Lambert Jr., while Friedrich Bergold took the job of defending him. Prosecutors said Bormann had been deeply involved in the Nazi government, helping shape and sign many of the anti-Jewish laws. That case rested on documents and testimony showing he worked close to the center of power. Bergold tried to argue the court had no right to convict a man who might already be dead, and because Bormann's work was secretive, he struggled to push back on the prosecution's claims. In the end, the tribunal found Bormann guilty of war crimes and crimes against humanity, but not guilty of the charge of planning aggressive war. On the 1st of October 1946, the court sentenced him to death by hanging. The judges added a practical note. If Bormann were later found alive, any new facts could be used to reconsider or change the sentence. For all the thrilling tales of secret escapes and South American hideouts, the truth is much more grounded and far more final. The myths about Hitler and Martin Bormann's survival collapse under hard, physical proof. Start with Adolf Hitler. The idea that he escaped was helped along by Joseph Stalin. For political reasons, Stalin raised doubts about Hitler's death, and that helped the stories spread. But what did investigators actually find? In the crater behind the Reich Chancellery, they recovered the remains of a man and a woman and 2 dogs. The key piece was a jawbone. Hitler's own dentist, Dr. Hugo Blaschke, and his assistant Käthe Heusemann examined it and matched the unique bridges, crowns, and fillings to Hitler's dental records. That match was decisive. Decades later, in 2017, a French forensic team gained rare access to the dental fragments in a secret archive and confirmed the findings. Their study, published in a scientific journal, backed the dental ID and concluded that Hitler died in 1945. The body in the crater was his. Martin Bormann's case drew even more legend, but science again closed it. For years, no body was found, fueling stories of sightings in South America. Then, in December 1972, workers in West Berlin dug up 2 skeletons. Forensic examiners found a dental bridge that matched Bormann's dentist records perfectly. The other skeleton was identified as Dr. Ludwig Stumpfegger, Hitler's physician. Both skulls showed glass fragments in the jawbones, the sign of biting cyanide ampules. Doubts lingered until 1998, when German authorities ran a DNA test. A living relative of Bormann provided a sample. It matched the skull, unearthed in 1972. That final test settled the question. The tales of U-boats, ratlines, and tropical hideouts are dramatic and enduring, but they are fiction. The hard evidence shows both men died in Berlin, their bodies left in the rubble of the regime they helped build. The truth may be less romantic than the myth, but here it is clear, final, and undeniable.